Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Fulfilling Work, Meaningful Life. I'm your host, Anthony Craiker, and I am so excited to be joined today by Larry Onan, author of Intentional Living and Giving. Larry, thanks for coming on the show today.
Well, Anthony, it's great to be with you today. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, Larry, what is the most meaningful experience you've had in the last week?
Well, last week, that's a little strange one. 3 weeks ago, I've got to go back, Anthony, because it happened 3 weeks ago. But after 51 years of waiting to do something that I didn't really need to do until it became almost an emergency situation, I got a cornea transplant. Now, cornea transplant, I was talking to somebody yesterday and they were thinking, well, is that like a laser? They just go in and zap, zap, zap. And I said, oh, no, this is a cornea transplant. And what's that? Well, I have a cornea transplant because a 38-year-old passed away through a heart attack 4 days before. And it's a donor transplant. And there's a lot of fear factor sometimes for people that when you realize, oh my gosh, you're taking something out and putting something else in. And my specialist that did it saw me the day afterwards. And he said, Larry, don't bend over. You can't lift more than 5-6 pounds. Number of rules. He said, let me tell you why. He says, the only thing that's holding your new cornea in place is 16 stitches. And he said, we've got to let that bond and take some time for that to connect to your body and become a part of your overall operation. So I went through a cornea transplant, and a week ago, 7 days ago, I saw the specialist for the first follow-up visit after the initial one. And I'm very blessed and fortunate because it's starting to grab hold. It's an interesting thing. I never realized this at all, but the first day I saw him after the surgery, he said, the first thing that's going to happen to you is that I put your new cornea into your eye, 38-year-old. It's very flexible, so you're blessed with that. But your eye and your body is going to remove the donor cells and cover your entire cornea with your cells. And that will take 7 to 10 days to encapsulate the new cornea with your cells. And I thought, there's an old passage of scripture that says, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. To think you go down to a little eyeball or a cornea that's, a very small piece of your eye even. And to think that in a matter of 7 to 10 days, my body will cover, encapsulate, protect the new cornea with my cells. And he said, I'm very pleased. It's working really well. So I'm very thankful for the fact. Now, if I close one eye, it's still blurry, but it's going to take a year for those 16 stitches to come out. But I'm very blessed by that. So when you ask me that question, that's the first thing I think of.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm glad to hear that it's going well for you. That's wonderful. It's amazing what medicine can do these days. A real blessing.
The topic is meaningful life, a part of your theme. Mm-hmm. And I think people sometimes are afraid to step into the unknown because they're afraid of the consequences. And I knew in 1967 I would need to have a cornea transplant someday. But I was able to hold it off for 51 years because of the right contact lenses, the right care. I was intentional in taking care of and stewarding the bad eye.
Yeah.
And I got 51 years out of it. Now I get to steward somebody else's eye that's no longer.
Well, that's a great transition because I'm so excited to talk to you about your book, Intentional Living and Giving. And I haven't finished it yet, but I'm working my way through it and really enjoying the story and the principles that you teach. And you talk a lot about stewardship. And I love the way that you think about stewardship because I think a lot of times when we hear the word stewardship, we think financial stewardship, and that's certainly important, but you're looking at it from a bigger perspective, right? A life stewardship, I guess, is maybe a way to put
Anthony,
it.
I'm a preacher's kid, and so from day one, I was burped in the church. I have a history of that. But I always thought stewardship meant that my dad had to preach for 3 weeks every year on money and manipulate the people to give more and on them to do the tithe and the whole routine. And I never thought much more about it other than that, just the way that most churches collect money is talking about your stewardship. I had no clue, really, Anthony, that it was much broader than that. And I was quite successful in what I was doing. I was working with a large international nonprofit. And for some reason, what I was doing was working. So I was invited to a meeting that they were having to discuss a major capital campaign, a funding strategy. And I was the low guy on the totem pole. I mean, I didn't belong in that meeting. I was probably 15 years younger than most of the people in the room. And there was a consulting firm that the organization had hired to help them evaluate if they could even do what they wanted to do. It was called a feasibility study
Hmm.
to see if you could even have big dreams. I mean, there's a lot of times, and I spent 35 years helping nonprofits not raise money because they weren't quite ready to do what they thought they were ready to do. That was feasibility, and you follow feasibility. Well, I was involved in this one, and I sat there. There was about a dozen people in the room. The consultants had their big board up, and they were showing how this could happen. But they said, if you don't do one other thing, you will not be successful in doing it. And you need to start teaching Christians and people across the world about lifestyle stewardship, help them understand what their role is. Well, the organization did not want to create another emphasis to start teaching. And there was back and forth, a little bit of batter going on. And I was sitting there thinking, well, I don't know what they're talking about, but I'll just keep my mouth shut. And somebody in the room said, well, why don't we assign that to Larry and let him investigate what that exactly means? I realized later that it was a tactic to get off subject. There was nobody really wanting me to do the research, but they assigned it to me. And I wrote down on a yellow pad of paper that day, the only thing I wrote in the whole probably hour meeting was figure out what lifestyle stewardship is. And then at the very bottom of the page, I wrote down the words, and you've got the freedom to fail. Because I have really learned that if I had accepted the reality of taking on big challenges in life, freedom to fail means you may not do it perfectly, but you can do a lot better than not doing it at all.
Yeah.
And I think many people are fearful of failing, so they never step into the arena. And I'd been drilled by a mentor that I really did have that freedom. And I wrote that down. I left the room 6 weeks later. Nobody had called me. Nobody was asking me how I was coming on my assignment. But I said, I've got to get my leadership team together. And I was working with a team of around 6 or 8 guys. And I said, we need to maybe figure this out. This could help us do our job. And I launched into figuring out something that I had was total surprise to me. Because stewardship is what God created Adam and Eve in Genesis 1 to do.
Hmm.
Basically, he created them to say, take care of my stuff. And he gave them a
Right.
garden. He told them they could take care of the animals. He could name the animals. God wanted a relationship, and he wanted somebody to take care of what he created. And the steward is one who is assigned the responsibility of taking care of somebody else's stuff.
Right. Right.
So that's the whole principle behind it. And I started to see how scripture unpacked that. And it transformed my life, my wife's life, the entire team's. We changed everything in our mindset about doing fundraising and began working on fund development and helping partners feel ownership in the mission of what the nonprofit was about. And it
Yeah.
transformed everything we did. It was a hinge to the future. I've spent 35 years working with other nonprofits, helping them think through how they go about doing things. So yeah, it was meaningful. It was meaningful personally, but it's not a strategy. I don't want people to think it's a technique to do something, but it transforms how you think about yourself when you realize I'm here to take care of somebody else's stuff. I don't own a house. I do pay taxes on a house California says I own. I
Yeah.
have a car. I have clothes in the closet. I have grandkids. I have kids. All of those things are simply entrusted to me. And it's my job to steward what has been given to me. And so I wake up every morning. This morning I woke up before I started my day. And the first thought was, what do I do today to impact the life of others? Because I'm stewarding today. And tomorrow is another day. The next hour is another hour that's been extended to me. I'm still here. So how do I
Yeah.
do that? And I think if you get
Wonderful.
that mindset working and understand the principles of that, you're transformed because now you're living a life of thriving rather than a life of defeat.
Yeah. So, and you spent decades teaching these principles about intentional living and stewardship. F- Talk to my listener for a moment. For those who may feel stuck or uncertain about their direction in life, where should they begin? How can they start applying these principles?
Well, I think it's important for anybody to say, I'm at a carnival in a bumper car game.
Hmm.
And bumper cars is when you're being slammed by the culture, you're being slammed by the world, you're being slammed by the relatives that don't like you, whatever the circumstances are. It's fun for a few moments while you're getting jarred around and being pushed around. But that is not life, because
Yeah.
life is collisions all the time. I think the first thing to do is admit that I'm not being focused and get out of the bumper cars, because I think many people are spending life just a hit and run accident all over the place, and they never really think about, why am I here today? What am I doing today that's meaningful? How do I influence and help somebody else have a meaningful life? That's the first step. Now, it's important, I think, for a person to understand, now that I'm choosing to live this way, what does it really mean? And I'm glad to unpack that even in my book. But really, the first step is, I need to be intentional of what I'm doing. I think the word intentional is very important there, because the intentionality is saying, I'm going to wake up today and do X. I'm not going to do something else. I'm going to create boundaries around me where you cannot mess me up.
Hmm.
And I think if you don't create boundaries, if you don't know where you're going, if you don't become focused on your objective, life is just going to bounce by, and you're going to be. I watched a gal come into an environment a few days ago, and I watched her life, and it's just been a bump to bump to bump. And then she had hurt herself, and she was walking with a walker. And I thought, here we go again. She's still at probably 60, 65, trying to figure out where true north is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a point in time where I say, I've blown it. This is not where I want to be. If you decide you want to be intentional, there's ways for you to become intentional. It's a
Good.
decision. It's upfront. Now, the application of how you do it, that's the lifelong fun part.
Yeah. Right. The lifelong pursuit for
Yeah.
sure. I think a lot of people want to be more generous, and you talk about being generous in your book, but they feel like maybe they don't have enough to give. What would you say to somebody who wants to live generously, but they're struggling financially?
Well, I think what they're focusing on is what they don't have rather than what they
Yep.
do have. This morning at my time of day, there's a cup of coffee here. I filled it to the brim, but I'm not going to waste it and dump the entire pot into this little 12-ounce cup,
Yeah.
because in some ways that's what God's done to you and to me both. He's filled us to the brim for today. He's not going to be wasteful and give us more than we can handle. In fact, he wants me to get rid of this cup before he wants me to fill the cup again. As I give what has been given to me to the life and the impact of somebody else, by my strengths, by my creativity, by my passion, by my emotional listening. There's 100 different ways people can give. Money is only one of many things. And I think that's the real turning point, is to realize that money is one of 100 things that I can give away.
Yeah.
When God says, okay, I've filled you to the brim, now use it wisely. And when you start to use it wisely, I'm going to fill you back up. I got fresh coffee waiting for you. And I think we've got to realize that the reason I am stuck in my lack of generosity is I probably have not been generous with what I've already been given. So when I start to give away what I've got, my time, my influence, my emotional capital, whatever those things are, then I think there's more to come. Generosity is a relative term. I had a couple of years ago in Ireland, and they had two mugs or two goblets of Waterford Crystal. In the United States, people think you got to have a set of 12. Well, the set of 12 is nice to have, but Waterford Crystal is not cheap.
Yeah.
And they were thrilled to death that on their wedding, somebody gave them two crystal goblets from Waterford Crystal. That's probably the only two goblets they had for their entire married life.
Yeah.
because that was generous to them. To somebody else in another culture, that's not generous. To some people, they don't know Waterford Crystal even exists. He's not putting us into competition. He wants us to use what he's entrusted to us. And what he entrusts to a person in another continent and another culture is different than what he entrusts to me. So I
Yeah.
think we get hung up on being generous. I've heard people say, well, if I had more money to give, I'd give more money. I said, well, can he trust you with the dollar you've got in your pocket? And if he
Yeah.
can't trust you with that, why would he trust you with $50 million? Because you'll treat the 50 million just like you treat the dollar.
Sure.
It's an attitude issue, Anthony. It really is a. I want to be generous. I want to be free. I don't want to be in pain because I did something. In one chapter of the book, I help people learn what not to give and when to
Yeah.
say no, because I think sometimes we feel like we're manipulated by circumstances. And there's good questions to ask so that you're making wise decisions, not emotional response decisions.
Yeah. Being responsible stewards
Yeah,
of the resources.
responsibility. I mean, that's when I get on an airplane and fly to Orlando or fly to New York or to Greece or wherever it is, I have people around me all the time. They're calling stewards, stewardesses and
Yeah.
stewards. What are they doing? They are being paid by the airline to protect the airline's asset. They're not there to make me feel good and give me peanuts and a Coke.
Yeah.
Now they use that as a front so that I feel comfortable relationally. But they are not flying in that airplane to serve me because they love me. They're looking out for the United Airlines or Delta or Lufthansa or whatever it is because they are there to protect the asset. I
Right.
think we've got to realize that we're here to protect and to distribute and care for something that does not belong to us. None of those stewards own that airplane.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good analogy. In the book, you talk about how generosity can unlock abundance. What does that look like in real life? What is abundance to you?
Well, it's the mindset. I had a guy some years ago. He retired from a very successful business. You would call him a wealthy person.
Hmm.
He came to a seminar where I was teaching this, and his goal in life was to retire and go into quote full time ministry, whatever he assumed that was. And the first step was to come to this particular conference. And I took him through about a 3 or 4 hour study on whole stewardship. It was just a part of the weekend's conference. And he came up to me at the end of that session. He said, I came out here with an expectation that I was going to make a shift in life and I was going to do what I've always thought I would like to do, and that's go into this quote ministry. But he said, I'm leaving here to go start a new business. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Tell me the story. And he said, well, I've been blessed. And he told me what the business was. He told me his generosity. Abundance was easy for him. He said, I realized that my stewardship model is I know how to make money and I can make more money. And so rather than doing what would be fun right now, I'm going to start another business so I can be even more generous with the second business because I don't need the money, but I know how to make it. And
Yeah.
he left and started another unrelated business to his first one, became very successful in a matter of 5 to 6 years, probably gave $4 or $5 million away in the process. And then I saw him some years later afterwards, and he said, well, I really had fun doing that. I was really generous. That was such a blessing. I know I can do it, but I still want to try out ministry. So he retired again and went with an organization where he could use his executive experience to help influence the executives and peers because he had a story to tell.
Yeah.
Well, his generosity and abundance came because he was using his strengths to do what God had created him to be. Not everybody's going to be successful in making money,
Yeah.
but he knew how to form it. He knew how to create teams. He knew how to do goal objectives, and he was very prudent in what he was doing. And he made very good use of his second time around when he didn't need the results. He just wanted to be able to be generous and giving it away. Abundance came because he was using his skill package, not because he was greedy and trying to make more money.
Yeah. He wasn't
And
focused
eventually he
on.
still did what he wanted to do. He still wanted to try out that quote, be in the ministry, whatever that meant.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's wonderful. Let's talk about legacy for a minute. How can people leave a legacy of intentionality for their posterity, for others to remember them by? How do you do that?
Well, I think some people, it's a wing and a prayer,
Mhm.
and they just hope it happens.
Yeah.
They may do a will, they may do a few little tools along the way. If you're a good steward, you're going to do more than that. You mean it's not about the amount of money; it's being rightful thinking. And I've seen numerous people. Well, years ago they were trying to set up private foundations. People were doing pretty successful. They would go in and set up a private foundation, and then they realized there was a tool in our toolbox called donor advised funds with large organizations. There's a number of them, even community foundations and cities have them.
Mhm.
The donor advised fund allows a person to give without creating another foundation. So they put their investment over into this fund, and then they have the privilege of redistributing that fund over a period of time or leave the responsibility eventually to their kids and grandkids to continue to leverage and give without the pain of legalizing another foundation and then running a foundation. When you set up a foundation, there's a responsibility forever for management. A donor advised fund, you're hiring somebody else with that expertise
Yeah.
to help you do that, and then you get the privilege of redistributing. I think people need to be thinking, how am I going to do this? What's the circumstances of my family? The complexities? Is it first marriage, second marriage, grandkids? The complexities are out there. I had one couple come to me some years ago and they said, we do not want our son to have the assets until he's at least 35 years of age. How do we set that up?
Yeah.
Because he will blow it if we died early and he is not responsible yet. And maybe by the time he's 30 or 35, he can handle and manage the stewardship of what we've got. So we worked on a way where he would not ever get the money in his 20s because
Yeah.
they were concerned about his second generation stewardship. And they said maturity is going to come over time. And as he marries and starts to having kids, they weren't taking away the privilege, but they knew that he wasn't ready for it. So I think if you're, out there in cyberspace and you're thinking, my family needs help, you can, I want to do this right. So there's, donor advice funds, get some good legal advice into it. I've got a person that serves as my backup attorney. She can be as tough as nails on me, and I don't really like it, but she says, I can't help you until you do X.
Yeah.
So she's going to help me do it right. And I'm dealing now in an area of stewardship where I don't have a lot of knowledge. So get the right kind of counsel to help you get there. But don't think I'll just do nothing, because nothing is worse for your kids and your grandkids. Legacy is chaotic if it's not planned.
Yeah.
And I think many people just hope that the kid's going to make it. I've set up my personal trust. It's not huge, but I've got a trust. I've got the ways to give to a donor advice fund. I don't want to put the burden on my kids to do everything, but I want them to have the joy of being a distributor of resources that dad left behind.
Yeah.
So there's some wisdom comes through it. So find good counsel, get some good input. I'm not trying to just sell the book, but get a hold of the book, Intentional Living and Giving, because the
Yeah.
principles in the second half are how you live this life on a day-to-day basis. It's just the practical side of, now that I understand who I am, how do I implement it? And I think people will be surprised on even learning how to say no and being a tough decision maker. That is part of stewardship. It's not a wing and a prayer. It is not, it's something. God does not appreciate people with no plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that there's some planning and then revising and evaluating. Those are things that are just part of life. It's not because you're a bad guy or even a good guy. It's because you're intentional on what you've been entrusted with. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So living intentionally, I think often requires course corrections, right? We talked earlier about how
Yeah.
it's a lifelong pursuit. What encouragement can you offer to somebody who may be listening to this who feels like maybe they've wasted time or resources in the past?
Well, there is a biblical principle called redeeming. And I think if a person realizes, okay, I've blown it here, I can't go back and redo everything. When you've blown the seed's blown.
Yeah.
I've worked with organizations where they think they've got money, but what they're doing is they're living on seed corn. And they have nothing to plant because they're living on something else. I'm consulting with a group right now, and they've lived for about 15 years with a pretty good resource. And they can sell property and they continue to add to the resource. And my counsel to the leader of it, I said, you cannot live this way forever. Someday there will be nothing to sell.
Yeah.
You've got to start thinking right. And first of all, it's in admitting that this is not the way to live. So I make a choice that I'm not going to live this way. It's not about how much is left over. It's not about the volume. I think in, one of the Jewish texts, the book of Deuteronomy, God is speaking to the children of Israel. Now, this is very children of Israel focused, so you got to look at the context. But basically, God said, I'll paraphrase it. God said to the children of Israel, I'm asking you and requiring you to give. But he says, I don't need your money. I just want you to put me first in all things. And if I get your attention with money, you start listening differently. So I'm not broke. I'm the God of the universe. I'm the one that created it all. I don't need your money, but I do want you to put me first in all things. So there is the attitude that says, okay, I'm 50 years of age. I've blown through this. I messed up this, but I can be a good steward from 50 to whenever God moves me out of this world. And it's a choice that becomes the turning point. What I picked up on the concepts of this became a transformational experience for my wife and I. We'd been married probably 6 to 10 years when I really got into this study.
Hmm.
And then it started transforming the entire team that was working on it. It wasn't because I was the genius that came up with lifestyle stewardship. I had a group of guys and gals that were working on this together, and they owned the outcome together. And they knew they were dealing with something that was totally different than what they thought. And so we were all at different ages at that time, but when we embraced a biblical view on what lifestyle stewardship was, and that's not becoming highly religious, it's just a biblical view.
Sure.
And then as we started applying that to our lives, we started thinking, okay, this is it's transforming me. And I think say you're 50, that's at the turning point of halftime, and
Hmm.
you're thinking, okay, I've blown everything before. What happens to me now? I think wherever you are today, listening today, whether you're right out of college or right into retirement, a recalibration of who you are and why you're here can transform the rest of your life. People are going to see the difference because you're going to start be acting different as a person. It's going to start showing because of how you give attention to others. It's going to be showing because you take time to do things you did not take time to do before. And yeah, there's probably some money along the way, and you can be generous in that. When I wrote the book, I thought I got to put one chapter out of 18 chapters about money because people expect a stewardship book to be about money.
Yeah.
And I think it's chapter 16 or 17. I said, okay, money. You've been expecting to talk about money, so let's talk about money.
Yeah.
But that's just one part of the life part of it. So it's not how much money you got. You've got life given to you. How do you steward your life?
Yeah. Very well said.
That's what we're doing here. So yeah, you can redeem the time. You can make up for lost time. You cannot go back and just collect all the seeds that you've blown.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we've done that, but life can be thrilling and an adventuresome. I want people to thrive. I don't want people to live in a sense of misery.
Well, Larry, I've really appreciate all that you said today, and I'm excited for people to learn about your book, and hope my listeners check it out. I'm really enjoying going through it. I love books like yours because you take your personal experience and what you've learned along the way, and then you take principles that are true, biblical principles, and then you show people how to apply them in their everyday lives. And that's one of the best ways to teach people, I think. So I appreciate the book, and I hope my listeners will check it out. Where can people find you and learn more about what you do?
Well, you can find the book at any place you buy books. You can
Hmm.
walk into any bookstore, Barnes and Noble. You can go to the Amazon. That's the humongous side of books worldwide. It's
Yeah.
available there. If you wanted a signed copy, you got to go to larryonan.com, but most people don't care if it's signed or not. They just need the content. And yeah, it's a book. It's very practical in stories, but it's not a theological study, although there's principles based on biblical text.
Yeah.
And so we are looking at a religious book. It's a faith book, but it's a real practical handbook of how I'm going to live my life. So that's available there. If you're wanting to touch with me, you can go to larryonan.com. There's a place for you to put in comments. There, I got blogs there. I've got other content that can be helpful to people. So I'm glad to interact if people want to interact with me in that regard. larryonan.com. But the book is Intentional Living and Giving.
Wonderful. And as always, for our listeners, we'll leave links in the show notes for you to check all that out. So, Larry, thanks so much for coming on the show today. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Anthony, have a great day and be blessed as you give it away.